I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
It was during one of those rare September afternoons when London seemed determined to dress itself in civility rather than fog that the affair began. A garden party was in full bloom at the residence of Lady Whitcomb, a woman of excellent standing and a reputation for collecting both objets d'art and people with equal enthusiasm. The lawns were freshly trimmed, the marquise gleamed white in the sunshine, and a string quartet provided a genteel murmur above the chatter of the well-to-do. It was here, amid the clinking of teacups and the rustle of silk dresses, that an incident occurred so slight in its unfolding, yet so consequential in its aftermath. A gentleman, striking in appearance, tall, impeccably groomed, with a foreign air about him, was observed bowing twice to Lady Whitcomb upon introduction. Once, as all men of courtesy might, but then again with an odd solemnity that left some of the guests glancing curiously. "That is Count Victor Radovich," murmured a silver-haired colonel to his neighbor. "A curious fellow. I hear he has estates in the Balkans, though whether they are real or merely in conversation is a matter of conjecture." The second bow became the talk of the party for precisely 3 minutes, until, as though the garden itself had conspired to draw attention elsewhere, Lady Whitcomb's maid appeared, breathless and pale. She whispered into her mistress's ear, and Lady Whitcomb's expression changed from gracious hostess to stricken widow in an instant. With an unsteady hand, she clutched the back of a wrought-iron chair. "A dreadful thing," she announced, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it. "Sir Reginald Stanbury has been found in the library." A hush fell over the assembled company. Within moments, the garden of laughter and gossip had transformed into a theatre of apprehension. Guests pressed closer, whispers carried the dreadful words. Murder, dead in the library. Poison, perhaps. 2 gentlemen were dispatched to investigate, returning with faces grim and grave. Sir Reginald was indeed lifeless, slumped in an armchair as though mid-thought, his glass of brandy overturned upon the Persian carpet. No sign of struggle, no weapon, only that peculiar serenity which attends sudden death. And yet, among the murmurs and rising panic, one detail lingered in the minds of those who had been attentive. The foreign gentleman, Count Radovich, had bowed twice, not once, as courtesy demanded, but twice, as though acknowledging more than mere acquaintance. By the time the police were summoned, suspicion had already begun to swirl through the air, as tangible as the scent of crushed roses. It was whispered that only a mind of the most delicate precision could untangle such a puzzle. And thus, before the sun had set on Lady Whitcomb's lawn, a name was murmured with a mixture of relief and awe. Lady Whitcomb's announcement broke the garden's gaiety, yet shock yielded to her habits of order. She directed the faint-hearted toward the far lawn, bade the quartet continue a gentle air, and gathered a smaller company on the terrace before the library's French windows. Count Radovich came at once, grave and polished. Mrs. Linton, the consulting curator, held herself with professional calm. Colonel Arbuthnot stiffened like a standard. Lionel Ashe, the pianist, hovered near the rail. Miss Vale, a cousin by courtesy, watched with bright, measuring eyes. "I must ask that you remain until the police arrive," Lady Whitcomb said, steadying her voice with manners. "Sir Reginald was found in the library, until the inspector concludes. Propriety demands patience." They murmured assent. Only Radovich's gaze moved, surveying doors and paths as if the house were a chessboard. Miss Vale, who preferred sequence to sympathy, said, "If he is dead, the first question is his last exact minute. Who can place him?" Mrs. Linton answered. "Shortly after 3 he asked for the collection ledger. We discussed what he believed an error concerning the Radcliffe snuff-box." "Provenance?" the colonel repeated, affronted by the word as if it were a foreign regiment. "The miniature inside the lid is catalogued as a later edition," Mrs. Linton said. "Sir Reginald believed it original. A pending sale might be effected." Lady Whitcomb coloured and recovered. A trifle, surely. Trifles are the hinges, Miss Vale murmured. Ash, eager to be useful, said, I saw him at 3:30 with a brandy, talking to the Colonel about polo ponies. Did we not, sir? We did, the Colonel said. He was in spirits. Inspector Kershaw arrived with sensible shoes and a notebook the color of duty. He posted 2 constables at the library, went in briefly, and returned with professional neutrality that could not quite hide a pinch of irritation at the room's tidy suggestiveness. Natural causes are unlikely, he said. No visible violence. Statements will be taken. No one leaves. You shall have every assistance, Lady Whitcomb promised, though her fingers worried a bracelet clasp as if it had betrayed her. A compact gentleman in pearl grey mounted the steps with the calm of one who arrives neither too soon nor too late. He removed his hat, revealing an egg-shaped head and moustaches that seemed to understand the world. He bowed once, completely. Madame, he said gently, permit that I express my sympathies. Hercule Poirot. The name moved through the party like a released breath. Kershaw, to his credit, accepted the inevitable with grace. I'll not refuse a competent observer, he said. But I must lead. But naturally, Poirot replied, order, always order. May I regard the room as it presents itself, before curiosity disturbs its little truths? He leaned to the glass. The library lay brown and calm, beeswax and books. At its still center, Sir Reginald sat slumped as if surprised by silence. Poirot's eye passed to the frame, a chair leg skew to the rug's border, a crescent left by an overturned glass, a blotter reversed on the desk. He touched nothing. He altered nothing. Madame, he said without turning, you remarked an oddity. Someone bowed twice? The Count, Lady Whitcomb admitted. It was peculiar. Peculiarities are labels one gives intentions not yet understood, Poirot murmured, and offered Radovick a courteous glance. You're exact in ceremony, monsieur. That is hardly criminal, Radovick returned, smiling with the lips. It may be a signature, Poirot said, and let the words settle. Inside, Kershaw verified the absence of pulse, noted the glass and the decanter, and the ledger with a page splayed like an untidy wing. No sign of struggle. Poison is possible, he said. Possible things are many, Poirot replied. He frowned very slightly at the blotter's wrong face upward, then at the decanter set an inch off center on its tray. He did not correct them. Who discovered the body? My maid, Grace, Lady Whitcomb said. She brought in more glasses, cried out and ran to me. Did she touch the decanter, the ledger? No, Kershaw said. She insists she did not. Poirot nodded as if completing a sum. Madame Linton, would a sale profit or suffer if the snuff-box were re-described? A sale could falter, Mrs. Linton said. Certain parties would lose a commission. Others might acquire the piece by private treaty. The Colonel harumphed. Commerce, not murder. Alas, Poirot said, they sometimes dance. He proposed, gently, yet with the firmness of permission, disguised as request, that statements proceed in strict chronology. From 3 to 4, he said, we must stitch a garment without dropped stitches. 5 witnesses will help us cut it true. Madame Linton, who speaks for the papers. Colonel Arbuthnot, who speaks for the breath. Monsieur Ashe, who hears what others do not and cannot help remarking it. Mademoiselle Vale, who sees what is missed. And finally, Monsieur le Comte, who adds where others subtract. Kershaw accepted the list with a brisk nod. Poirot entered the library, pausing on the threshold as if to bow to the room itself. He circled once, very small, and stopped. Poirot's small circle around the room was no idle promenade. His patent leather shoes paused deliberately at the rug's edge, where the fibers were pressed in one direction save for a narrow reversal, as though a chair had been moved and pushed hastily back. His gaze then drifted to the mantel clock, ticking steadily, its hands showing 4:45. He noted this but said nothing, merely permitting his moustaches to twitch with private reflection. Inspector Kershaw cleared his throat, half impatient, half respectful, as though aware that Poirot saw meaning in disturbances invisible to ordinary eyes. "We'll begin with statements," Kershaw said. "Madam Linton, if you please." Mrs. Linton inclined her head with composed gravity. At 3 precisely, Sir Reginald came to the gallery alcove where I had placed the Radcliffe snuff-box. He held the ledger and declared the miniature was genuine. We debated, politely I assure you, for perhaps 10 minutes. He then excused himself, saying he would check a reference in the library. I remained until 20 minutes passed, when the Colonel approached. The Colonel stiffened in corroboration. I found him already with a brandy in hand. We spoke of polo and his old regiment. He laughed heartily and looked in the pink. No sign of distress. Poirot nodded. "And you left him?" "At 3:30. I was summoned by Lady Whitcomb to discuss the roses. Reginald was alone, as far as I could tell." Poirot folded his hands. "So, from 3:30 until near 4, the library is a room unwatched. It is a little gap, yes? And in a gap, things enter." He turned to Lionel Ashe, who had been fidgeting with his cufflinks. "Monsieur Ashe, you also saw Sir Reginald?" Yes. I passed the doorway not long after 3:30. He was seated, swirling his brandy, talking to himself about provenance, I think. I did not intrude." Poirot's brows rose. "Talking to himself, monsieur. That is curious." Ashe flushed. "Perhaps muttering is more exact. Words about authenticity, worth millions, something of that sort. I caught only fragments." Miss Vale, eager to contribute, leaned forward. "I came through the hall at 4:45. I noticed the French windows half drawn and thought it odd, since they are usually kept closed. I also observed Count Radovich leaving the terrace at that moment." The eyes of the group turned toward the Count. He met their gaze without flinching, his smile courteous. "Indeed, I strolled the terrace to admire the roses. If anyone saw me by the windows, it was chance. I did not enter the library." Poirot inclined his head. "We establish movements, not guilt, monsieur. Yet details, they must be exact. Did you remark whether the curtain stirred? Was there a sound?" Radovich spread his hands. "The air was still. I recall no sound." Inspector Kershaw scribbled notes with a blunt pencil, muttering about opportunities and timings. Poirot, meanwhile, had crouched delicately by the desk. His finger hovered an inch above the blotter that lay reversed. It is not of importance, perhaps, but why is a blotter turned? Habit is steady, change is the friend of significance. He rose, dusting invisible motes from his trousers, and asked quietly, "Lady Whitcomb, did Sir Reginald suffer ill health?" "None," she replied, pale. "He was vigorous, though inclined to worry over business affairs. He was to travel to Paris next week on account of the sale." Poirot murmured, "Paris, the city where fortunes are lost as swiftly as they are made." His tone was meditative rather than dramatic, yet several guests shifted uneasily. Kershaw closed his notebook. "Enough for now. We'll have the maid in." Grace, timid and trembling, described finding Sir Reginald seated strangely, his head lolling. She had placed the tray of glasses on the table, shrieked, and fled without touching aught else. Poirot questioned her gently, extracting a precise picture of the overturned glass and its position on the rug. She insisted the decanter was exactly as it had been left, only the glass disturbed. When she was dismissed, Poirot turned to the company with a mild smile. "We see, do we not, how every person observed a fragment? Yet fragments are tricky things. They may cut the truth into pieces." "What truth, monsieur?" Miss Vale asked, her eyes bright. Poirot's mustache twitched. "That Sir Reginald, so hearty at 3:30, is dead before 4. In 15 minutes a life ends. One asks, who profited? Who feared? And why such neatness? No struggle, no mark, only an overturned glass. Inspector Kershaw said firmly. Poison seems the likely cause. We'll have the doctor confirm. Ah, but poison requires preparation, Poirot murmured. One does not stumble upon it like a loose coin. Someone intended, long before 3 o'clock. He walked toward the window, noting the faint smear on the brass handle. The French windows were not wholly shut. A trifle, but trifles. He let the words trail. The colonel, impatient, demanded, "Do you suspect an intruder, then?" Poirot raised a hand. One suspects nothing. One observes. Intrusion may be from without, or from within the circle itself. The bow, twice given. Why twice? Courtesy or signal? The ledger reversed, the blotter wrong side up, the decanter shifted by a single inch. Accident or communication? His questions wove the air into a web. Silence followed, taut with possibilities. Poirot, sensing the moment, announced gently, "There is order to be found. Mes amis, we will hear more, each one in calm sequence. And we will discover that even the smallest gesture contains meaning, provided one has the patience to see." With that, he resumed his seat, steepled his fingers, and waited for the inspector to call the next witness, while outside the sun slid lower, casting long shadows across the garden where whispers of suspicion had already begun to take root. Inspector Kershaw cleared his throat and beckoned the group to settle once more, his pencil poised to capture each variation of truth. Poirot leaned back with hands folded, his eyes traveling from face to face as though each expression were a page in a book that only he could read. The colonel had seated himself with the square rigidity of a man unused to scrutiny. Mrs. Linton maintained her professional calm. Ash drummed nervous fingers upon his knee. Miss Vale's gaze darted keenly from one to another, and Count Radovic, polished and inscrutable, offered a faint smile that revealed nothing and suggested much. Lady Whitcomb presided in brittle composure, but the tremor in her clasped hands betrayed the storm within. Kershaw began by pressing Lionel Ash further, sensing the pianist's nerves might yield more than he wished. Ash shifted in his chair and admitted that he had overheard Sir Reginald muttering not only about authenticity, but also about betrayal, words whispered as though to ward off some invisible accuser. He said, "They think me a fool, but I shall prove them wrong." Something of that sort, Ash stammered. Poirot's eyes gleamed briefly, and he inclined his head. "Merci, monsieur. It is the tone of a man defending himself, not boasting. That distinction, subtle, but profound." Mrs. Linton adjusted her spectacles, unwilling to let her professional opinion be clouded. He was obstinate, yes, but his scholarship was never in question. If he felt betrayed, it was likely by someone who cast doubt upon his collection. Her eyes drifted, perhaps unconsciously, toward Lady Whitcomb. At once, Lady Whitcomb stiffened. My husband's affairs were his own. I never concerned myself with ledgers or appraisals. Yet the flush on her cheeks betrayed more than indifference. Poirot spoke softly, almost to himself. A gentleman defends his honor in scholarship as others defend it on the battlefield. For him, the accusation of forgery may wound more deeply than the thrust of a sword. The colonel grunted in agreement, though whether from sympathy or impatience none could tell. Poirot then turned his attention to Miss Vale. "You, mademoiselle, observed the French windows ajar. Was anyone upon the terrace besides our distinguished count?" She thought carefully before replying. "I saw only Radovic as he descended toward the rose beds. Yet I confess, I heard a faint click as of glass upon wood. It may have been the decanter, though I was not within the room." Her voice carried a tremor of eagerness, as though she relished providing a useful observation. Radovic spread his hands gracefully. "If a sound was heard, it was not by me. I walked in open view. Surely, Monsieur Poirot, you do not think a man would commit a crime while bowing in sight of 20 guests?" Poirot smiled politely. Crimes, monsieur, are not always committed in shadows. Some are enacted before an audience, trusting that the audacity itself will shield the actor. It is a little paradox, n'est-ce pas? The Count inclined his head, his smile tightening. Inspector Kershaw, perhaps uneasy with such delicate fencing, interjected with authority. We must keep to evidence, not riddles. The doctor will soon tell us whether poison is confirmed. Until then, we may only note opportunity. From 3:30 to 4:15, anyone might have entered the library unseen. And yet, Poirot murmured, not anyone. The arrangement of time, the order of movements, they reduce our circle, they sharpen its edges. At that moment, Grace returned timidly with word that Dr. Hensley had arrived. The physician, brisk and practical, entered and reported in short order that Sir Reginald had indeed succumbed to a substance consistent with digitalis, swift, potent, and bitter enough to be disguised only in strong flavor such as brandy. There was no trace of violence, nor any natural cause to explain the sudden collapse. Poison administered within the half hour, the doctor concluded. The glass and decanter should be tested. The declaration settled like a stone upon the assembly. Lady Whitcomb covered her face with a handkerchief. Ash muttered a prayer, and the colonel swore softly beneath his breath. Radovic's expression did not change. Only the faintest narrowing of his eyes betrayed reflection. Poirot, however, seemed almost serene. Digitalis, a choice at once clever and careless. Clever because its symptoms mimic the heart's own failure. Careless because its bitterness requires disguise, thus narrowing the field to those who knew Sir Reginald's habits. He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle yet commanding. "Tell me, Lady Whitcomb, did your husband ever take brandy at unusual hours?" She hesitated, then admitted, "Rarely before dinner. This afternoon was exceptional." "And why exceptional?" Poirot asked. She faltered. He was troubled by the dispute over the snuff-box. He said he required fortification. Poirot nodded gravely. So the poisoner knew not only his weakness for brandy, but also that today he would indulge earlier than habit. That knowledge is intimate, precise. Kershaw, eager to reassert authority, demanded that the decanter be sealed and the glass removed for analysis. Poirot agreed readily. Yes, the analysis will tell us what the mind already whispers. But for now, let us not neglect the psychology. Who among us stood most to gain from Sir Reginald's discredit? Who trembled most at exposure? His gaze travelled once more across the assembly, resting a heartbeat longer upon each face. The colonel bristled. "I had no interest in snuff-boxes, sir. My talk was of polo, nothing more." Ash protested that his only concern was music. Miss Vale declared she sought merely to assist her cousin. Mrs. Linton reiterated her professional neutrality, and Radovic, smiling faintly, remarked that collectors always quarrelled over trifles and that he, as a guest, had no stake. Poirot received each denial with a courteous nod, as though filing them in order within the cabinets of his mind. The evening deepened, shadows lengthened, and lamps were lit in the drawing-room where the party now found themselves gathered. Poirot requested that none retire. "Patience, mes amis. The pattern begins to show itself, but the weave is delicate. One more thread, and the design will reveal its shape." His tone was calm, but beneath it pulsed the promise of revelation, and each heart in the room beat faster, uncertain whether the next detail to emerge would free them from suspicion or bind them more tightly within its grip. The lamps glowed warmly in the drawing-room, their amber light pooling upon polished wood and gilt frames, yet the atmosphere remained taut with unease. Poirot sat a little apart, serene and still, his eyes half closed as though he listened not to the spoken words, but to the faint hum of hidden truths. Lady Whitcomb pressed a cup of tea between her trembling hands, sipping nothing, while the colonel paced with military impatience across the carpet. Ash lingered by the piano, his fingers brushing nervously across the keys as though any sound might betray his agitation. Miss Vale remained composed, her eyes fixed upon Poirot with an intensity that suggested admiration mingled with a hunger for discovery. Radovic reclined elegantly in a chair, as though the affair entertained rather than alarmed him. Mrs. Linton occupied herself with arranging her gloves on her lap, careful, methodical, betraying little outward concern. Inspector Kershaw, meanwhile, prowled with the air of a man unwilling to cede authority to silence. Poirot broke it with a gentle cough. "We are all weary, yet it is at such times that clarity may arrive. Permit me to ask, Lady Whitcomb, whether your husband had any recent quarrels of a personal kind, aside from the scholarly matter?" She hesitated, glancing toward the others before speaking. He had grown suspicious of certain offers made for pieces in his collection. He feared he was being deceived. Only last week he accused a dealer of inflating values. It made him restless, sleepless. He said often, "One seeks to make me the fool." Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. The same phrase Monsieur Ash overheard. To be deceived. Yes, it was a fear near to obsession. And when obsession rules, it is in that quarter we must look for motive. The Colonel snorted. Collectors' quarrels, appraisers' disputes, hardly grounds for murder. Poirot lifted a finger. "Mon Colonel, men have been killed for trifles less. The pride of ownership, the humiliation of exposure, the fear of ruin, these weigh upon the heart more heavily than gold. They press, and then crack." His hand mimed the breaking of a twig. "And so, Sir Reginald, vigorous, well, yet fearing ridicule, dies with brandy in hand. It is a drama played not with sword, but with bitterness hidden in the drink." Inspector Kershaw asked bluntly, "Do you accuse someone here?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Accusation is premature, mon ami. What I offer is progression. The poisoner is among us, yes. Already the circle narrows. For who knew Sir Reginald would break his habit and drink brandy at the hour? Who had access to the library between 3:30 and 4:45? These are not many." He looked round at them all, one by one, his gaze lingering fractionally longer on Radovic. Radovic's eyes gleamed. "You look at me, monsieur, yet I am a guest only. I admired roses. I did not poison brandy." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps you admired the roses to be observed admiring them, while your true concern was elsewhere. But patience. We shall not hurry," Miss Vale interjected softly. "Might it not have been the maid? She alone was in and out without notice." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mademoiselle. Grace found the body, but her terror was too unstudied. And the knowledge required, digitalis, its bitterness, the choice of moment, that is not the realm of a servant. No, it is of someone with calculation." Mrs. Linton adjusted her gloves, her voice precise. "Digitalis is common in medical use. Many know its taste may be disguised. That knowledge does not narrow the field as neatly as you suggest." Poirot smiled approvingly. "You are exact, madame. Yet there is another detail. The decanter, it was shifted by an inch. To many, a trifle. To me, a whisper. Whoever poured that fatal drink replaced it not quite as it had been. Such imperfection betrays a hand in haste." The Colonel stopped pacing. "Then you mean to say the murderer had to act swiftly, fearing discovery. That suggests it happened just before he died." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. Between 3:30 and the discovery at 4:45. 15 minutes. In that narrow passage of time lies our truth." The company fell silent, each calculating his or her own movements. Poirot observed them without pity, his gaze keen, his little grey cells whirring in harmony with the clock upon the mantel. "Let us then recall precisely. Colonel, you left at 3:30. Monsieur Ash, you passed soon after. Mademoiselle Vale, you crossed the hall at 4:45. Monsieur le Comte, you were observed upon the terrace. Madame Linton remained in the gallery. Lady Whitcomb, you were with the roses. Thus everyone accounted for, yet Sir Reginald is dead. He leaned forward. Which of these accounts conceals a shadow? Kershaw muttered about checking servants and doors, but Poirot silenced him with a raised hand. In due time, yes. But first, the psychology. The man who bowed twice. Tell me, Count Radovich, why twice? Radovic's smile broadened. In my country it is custom, once for greeting, once for respect. Poirot nodded politely. Perhaps, or perhaps once for courtesy, once for conspiracy. We shall see. Lady Whitcomb rose suddenly, her composure shattering. This is intolerable, to sit and hear suspicion thrown among my guests. Poirot approached her gently, lowering his voice. Madame, it is intolerable indeed. Yet justice demands endurance. Think, your husband's honor demands it. To find who mocked him with falsehood, who ended his days. She wavered, then sank again, clutching her handkerchief. Poirot turned back to the assembly, his manner calm once more. Tonight, mes amis, no one departs. Tomorrow, with daylight, we shall examine the papers, the ledgers, the snuff-box itself. But already, the net closes. Already, I begin to see which thread, if pulled, will unravel all. His eyes glinted, and though his smile remained mild, the weight of his certainty pressed upon them all, leaving each to wonder in the silence of the lamplight whether it was their own secret that he had glimpsed, folded away with precision into the order of his little grey cells. Night pressed close to the windows until only the clock's measured beat remained. Inspector Kershaw placed a constable in the corridor and another at the terrace doors, locked the library, and pocketed the key. Poirot approved, then asked for a fresh pad, a plain fountain pen, and envelopes. When Grace brought them, he arranged the items with fastidious care. A small formality, he told the company. Please write in your own hand a brief account of your movements between 3 and 4. No rhetoric, only facts. Sign and seal. They complied. The colonel wrote with a blunt, impatient stroke. Mrs. Linton's lines were neat and exact. Ash's letters sloped like notes gliding off a stave. Miss Vale steadied her grip and produced a controlled elegance. Radovic's script was small and formal. Lady Whitcomb, after a tremor that shook a bead of ink onto the margin, set down a dutiful paragraph. Kershaw, distrustful, asked what this added to spoken statements. Poirot's moustaches curved. Often the tongue adorns where the hand confesses. The order of words reveals the order of thought. A bell announced supper. Few ate. Poirot took coffee and a biscuit with ceremonious exactness, then requested 5 minutes with each guest. With Miss Vale, he walked the corridor. She admitted in a low voice that household finances had grown constricted after ventures failed. Sir Reginald hoped the Paris sale would ease matters, she said. If the snuff-box were reclassified, values would tumble. He feared humiliation. Her eyes flicked toward the drawing-room. He also feared Lady Whitcomb's patience. With Ash in the music-room, Poirot stood by the piano. Ash confessed a debt for which Sir Reginald had stood surety. Exposure gnawed at him. He promised discretion if I performed at 2 private evenings, Ash said. It was vanity as much as charity. Poirot touched 3 keys and let them fade. Debt is a narrow ledge, mon ami. 1 step sideways and down. The colonel, questioned by the fire, bristled. Yes, I carry a tonic, he snapped, producing a brown bottle. Doctor's orders, not digitalis. See for yourself. Poirot nodded. Tincture of valerian, yet you keep it where a man keeps a revolver. Habit of campaigns, said the colonel. Mrs. Linton met him among the glass cases. A change of attribution affects my fee, she said. Ruin me, no, but a forgery under my watch would wound. Radovich received him at the window, the roses dark beyond. Your double bow, Poirot observed, is elegant punctuation. One wonders what sentence it concludes. Radovic smiled. In some courts it concludes a bargain. Here it concludes a greeting. I have no bargain with anyone in this house. Even with debt, Poirot murmured. Men make bargains they do not name. At last, Lady Whitcomb. In the morning room she confessed that her husband expected a letter to vindicate the snuff-box's history. From an acquaintance in Vienna, she whispered. He believed it would settle everything. Did it arrive? No. He asked the post after luncheon. There was nothing. Poirot considered. Yet someone turned the blotter. Why, unless to hide an impression? You think a copy was pressed? I think a ghost was made, he said. Tomorrow we shall see what body fits it. He found Kershaw and requested the library key. Together they entered. We touch nothing, Poirot said. We only look. The blotter, still reversed, showed faint specks where pressure had driven ink through. See, mon ami, the nap is flattened here and raised there, as if turned in haste, and on the leather lip, a grain of sugar. Sugar. Kershaw bent closer. Yes. Dissolved in brandy, it would dull Digitalis's bitterness to a hurried palate. It is a cook's wit, or coward's. Grace, Kershaw began. No, Poirot said. She brought a tray. She did not prepare a murder. The night is kind, Poirot told them when they returned. It settles dust so that in the morning one sees the track. We lack a letter. Its ghost lies upon a blotter. When we find the body of the letter to fit that ghost, we shall be close. Grace brought the post bag, seals unbroken. No Vienna letter lay within. Poirot did not seem disappointed. Then the letter is intention, or it was intercepted. Interception is a crime of proximity. Who has the privilege of the Morning Post? He asked. I alone, Lady Whitcomb said. The porter brings the afternoon bag to the hall. After that, any guest might pass it. So one needed knowledge that a letter might come and an eye for opportunity, Poirot said. He assigned rooms and asked that no one open a window or accept refreshment not poured in an officer's presence. As they dispersed, Poirot lingered by the mantel. The clock marked each second with modest certainty. Outside, the roses breathed a faint sweetness into the darkness. He placed the common pen in his pocket, reconsidered, and returned it to the table in exactly its former place. His mustaches softened into a smile. Order, he murmured. Always order. When one sees the single thing out of place, one finds the hand that moved it. Dawn crept softly across the Whitcomb estate, pale light filtering through curtains heavy with dust of years, until it spread across the drawing-room where Poirot had chosen to remain wakeful. He had slept but an hour, yet he appeared immaculate, his moustaches precise, his attire without crease. Inspector Kershaw arrived, eyes red from a night half spent between paperwork and coffee. He found Poirot gazing at the sealed envelopes from the previous evening. Each one, Poirot murmured, a little confession, not of crime perhaps, but of character. To read handwriting is to read the heart, is it not? Kershaw grunted, unconvinced. Poirot tapped Radovic's envelope. This hand. It strains to be correct, the loops too narrow, the slant too careful. Such a hand belongs to one ever conscious of appearances. Yet truth slips through despite formality. Lady Whitcomb entered then, pale but steadier. She wore black, though no mourning period had yet begun, as though her heart anticipated the official verdict. She carried with her the household post, delivered at dawn. Poirot accepted it with a bow. He sifted carefully. Invitations, a bill, a foreign circular, a letter postmarked Vienna. His eyes sharpened. At last, he whispered. The letter was addressed to Sir Reginald, the seal intact. With Lady Whitcomb's permission, Poirot slit it delicately. The page within bore the signature of a scholar, one Dr. Engel of the Austrian Academy, attesting that the miniature in the Radcliffe snuff-box was indeed a later addition. Sir Reginald's conviction of authenticity was wrong. His honor had been at stake. Poirot spread the sheet upon the table. Behold, the ghost upon the blotter finds its body. Someone last night feared the arrival of this very letter. They attempted to trace it in advance. When certainty came too late, they resorted to poison. Lady Whitcomb pressed her hand to her mouth. So his ruin was inevitable, but murder came first. Poirot inclined his head. Exactement. The motive is not gain, but desperation to silence the matter before exposure. The colonel, summoned by Kershaw, declared the entire business nonsense. Forgery or not, Reginald would not have been ruined. He was too solid for scandal. Mrs. Linton contradicted quietly. Collectors live on reputation, Colonel. One exposure, and buyers withdraw. He would have been humiliated, and if any among us had been complicit in a false attribution, they too would suffer. Her gaze lowered to her gloves. Poirot studied her keenly. A fair point, madame. Yet humiliation is not always shared equally. For one, it is a professional wound. For another, it is utter ruin. Poirot then requested that the snuff-box itself be brought. Grace fetched the object from its cabinet. Poirot examined the miniature, the hinge, the enamel, handling it with reverence. He then invited Mrs. Linton to explain her opinion before them all. She obliged, pointing out brushwork inconsistent with the supposed period. Poirot listened with respectful silence before closing the box and setting it down with precision. So, Sir Reginald was wrong, but more important, someone among us knew he awaited confirmation, knew its arrival would unmask deceit, and feared what consequence might follow. Radovich shifted in his chair, a faint flicker betraying discomfort. Poirot addressed him gently. Count, you have knowledge of art, of commerce, of transactions in shadow as well as light. Tell us, would a forged provenance profit you? Radovich smiled tightly. A collector buys what pleases the eye, not merely what satisfies a ledger. If Sir Reginald was wrong, it is no affair of mine. Poirot spread his hands. No affair, yet you bowed twice. Once for greeting, once, I think, for farewell. A signal to yourself, perhaps, that a matter was closed. Radovich laughed softly, but no warmth reached his eyes. Poirot turned next to Ash. Monsieur, you confessed debt. If Sir Reginald's fortunes crumbled, your protector crumbled with him. That too is motive, though not the sharpest. Ash paled. I would never. Good God, I only owed him gratitude. Poirot did not press. He turned to Miss Vale. You spoke of financial strains. If ruin came, the house itself might be lost. Such fear breeds folly. Miss Vale lifted her chin. I love this house, but not enough to kill for it. Sir Reginald was kind to me. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Inspector Kershaw demanded action. Enough of these insinuations. We need proof. Poirot smiled. Patience, mon ami. Proof ripens like fruit. Plucked too soon, it is bitter. He gestured toward the decanter, still sealed in evidence. Consider, the poison was added with sugar to mask its taste. Who had sugar at hand? Not Grace. Her tray was fresh. Who then? A guest who took coffee, perhaps, or one who carries sugar lumps habitually. Lady Whitcomb gasped softly. Poirot's gaze followed hers to the colonel, who stiffened. From his waistcoat he produced, half defensive, a small tin of cubes. A campaigner's habit, he barked. Tea in the field is bitter, I sweeten it. Poirot's mustache twitched. So practical, mon colonel, yet when one cube dissolves with medicine, it is deadly. Kershaw surged forward, but Poirot raised a hand. Not yet. Motive, opportunity, means, yes, the colonel has two, but there is more. The letter's ghost upon the blotter. Who would know to seek it? Not the colonel, not Ash. but one accustomed to documents, to scholarly confirmation, one for whom the difference between authenticity and forgery is bread and butter. His eyes turned slowly toward Mrs. Linton. The room froze. Mrs. Linton's composure cracked just slightly as her gloved hands tightened. Poirot's voice was soft. You feared the letter. You attempted to trace its words. When certainty eluded you, you chose the quicker silence of poison. The snuff-box would not ruin Sir Reginald alone. It would ruin you. That, madame, is the greater desperation. Mrs. Linton's lips parted, but no denial came. The silence deepened, each heart thudding against suspicion, until Kershaw stepped forward with his hand upon her arm. Poirot sighed gently, yet still one question remains: how, precisely, the act was done. And that, mes amis, we shall see more clearly before this day ends. Mrs. Linton did not attempt to rise when Inspector Kershaw laid a firm hand upon her arm. She sat rigidly, her lips pressed tight, her eyes fixed upon the snuff-box upon the table as if it mocked her composure. Poirot regarded her with grave courtesy, not triumph. "Madame," he said, "you see how suspicion clings to you, yes? But let us not rush. The little grey cells, they demand exactitude. You feared exposure, you attempted to trace a letter, but fear alone is not the same as action. Let us proceed carefully." Kershaw frowned. "You mean you're not ready to have her taken in?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Not yet. Motive, yes. Opportunity, yes, but proof. That must be flawless. A chain is only as strong as its final link." He turned to Mrs. Linton again. "Permit me, madame. Did you know Sir Reginald awaited a letter from Vienna?" After a pause, she admitted, "Yes. He told me 3 days ago. He was confident it would vindicate him. I warned him that confirmation could bring disappointment as easily as triumph. He dismissed me." Poirot inclined his head. "So you understood what the letter might contain. You feared your judgment would be doubted, and if his opinion were upheld, you would be accused of incompetence. A heavy burden." The colonel muttered. "She had every cause, then. That's plain enough." Poirot silenced him with a raised hand. "Plain is not the same as true, mon colonel. Remember this." He drew from his pocket one of the sealed accounts written the night before. He opened Mrs. Linton's envelope, scanning her neat lines. "You wrote, 'At 3:20 I parted from Sir Reginald in the gallery. At 3:30 the colonel approached him. I did not see him again.' Exact, formal, without flourish. Yet tell me, how could you know the colonel joined him at 3:30 unless you observed it?" Mrs. Linton's composure flickered. "I heard voices carry, the gallery echoes. That is all." Poirot's moustache twitched, perhaps, but the pen betrays confidence where the tongue offers uncertainty. Lady Whitcomb, pale and restless, interjected suddenly. "If Mrs. Linton feared exposure, so too did my husband. Might it have been suicide, a desperate act before the letter arrived?" The suggestion quivered in the air. Poirot regarded her with deep sympathy but shook his head. "No, madame. Suicide leaves a different handwriting, the glass overturned, the decanter displaced, the sugar cube masking bitterness. These are not the gestures of one resigned. They are the stealth of another's hand." Kershaw called for the decanter and glass once more. The doctor had sealed them, but under close light, Poirot drew attention to the rim of the glass. "Observe, a faint stickiness remains. Sugar melted upon contact. Who prepared such a drink? Not Sir Reginald. He took his brandy plain. It was given to him, pressed upon him." He turned slowly, letting his gaze rest upon each. "Who among you was near enough, bold enough, to offer him comfort in the guise of cordial?" Miss Vale stirred, her voice quiet. "I passed the hall at 3:15. I saw no one enter or leave the library, but I did hear a phrase, faintly before I turned the corner. A man's voice saying, 'Drink it, Calm yourself." The room froze. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A phrase most revealing. And whose voice, mademoiselle?" She shook her head, troubled. "I cannot swear. It was brief, muffled. But not Sir Reginald's, that I am certain." Radovic leaned forward, elegant and unruffled. "Voices are easily misheard. Perhaps it was imagination." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Imagination? Perhaps. Yet twice now you dismiss what others observed. Once the windows, now the voice. That is not imagination, monsieur. That is resistance." The colonel, impatient, barked, "If it was a man's voice, then either myself, Ash, or the Count." Linton could not disguise her tone. Ash blanched. "I never entered that room, I swear it." His protest rang shrill in the heavy air. Poirot regarded him keenly. "You owed him money. If he fell, your debt was uncollectible. But gratitude and guilt are close cousins. Did you offer him a brandy to soothe his temper, to bind him kindly? Did you then see opportunity?" Ash shook his head violently. No, I would never." Poirot allowed silence to stretch, as though weighing the words against the room itself. Then he said softly, "In truth, mes amis, what we have are fragments, scattered like petals on the lawn. A sugar cube, a letter feared, a voice overheard, a bow given twice. Yet the order will emerge. This morning I shall examine again the snuff-box, the ledger, and above all, the blotter. For within that reversed sheet lies not merely a ghost of words, but a clue to the hand that feared them." He gathered the sealed accounts once more, tucking them neatly together. "We are close, very close. By this evening I believe the net will close as well." He rose, bowing slightly. "For now, breakfast, mes amis. One must feed the body if one expects the mind to labor. And though you eat, each of you will taste suspicion in place of salt. It is inevitable, until the truth is revealed." They dispersed reluctantly. Voices hushed, movements guarded. Poirot lingered, smoothing the blotter with a delicate fingertip. He looked up at Kershaw, whose impatience crackled like static. "Courage, mon ami," Poirot said softly. "This case is a labyrinth, but every labyrinth has one thread that leads to the center. I have touched that thread. Soon we shall see where it ends." The breakfast table had been set with faultless propriety, but the clink of cutlery carried no cheer. Conversation was reduced to fragments, each guest weighing words as if every syllable might bind them tighter to suspicion. Poirot, however, applied himself to toast and eggs with measured elegance, pausing now and then to glance at the company. Inspector Kershaw consumed his meal briskly, as though fortification would substitute for patience. It was Poirot who broke the silence. "Let us resume, mes amis. The morning brings clarity. Last night we touched the outline of guilt. Today we shade it in." Lady Whitcomb, pale though composed, asked faintly, "Do you mean the truth is already clear?" Poirot inclined his head. "To me, the truth begins to take shape. But truth must not only be seen, it must be proved, so that even those who would deny it must bow before order." The colonel pushed away his plate. "Then get to the point, man. You've had us sitting in suspense long enough." Poirot's mustaches bristled. "Suspense, mon colonel, is the crucible in which falsehood breaks. The guilty grow restless, the innocent endure." His gaze drifted to Ash, who dabbed at his lips nervously. "Monsieur Ash, you did not sleep, I think." Ash started. "No, I mean barely. Who could sleep in such circumstances?" Poirot observed him kindly, but offered no further comment. After breakfast, they returned to the library. The morning sun revealed details and obscured the evening before. Motes of dust gleaming in slanted light, a faint scuff upon the skirting board, the edge of the rug pressed oddly flat. Poirot crouched beside the rug and drew Kershaw's attention to it. "Observe, mon ami." A chair moved, replaced hastily. "Why?" Sir Reginald sat there, yes, but another sat near him, facing him, pressing him with words. And a glass. Kershaw muttered agreement, scribbling notes. Poirot then returned to the desk. The blotter still fascinated him. He requested a simple sheet of plain paper which he laid upon the blotter, rubbing gently with the flat of a pencil. Slowly, faint impressions appeared, broken words, half phrases, but enough to suggest a sentence. Miniature later, reputation, exposed. You see, Kershaw? Someone traced the letter's expected content, but more, here at the bottom, an unfinished name. The pen pressed harder, forming Lee, the start of Linton, perhaps? Madame feared her name entangled. Mrs. Linton gasped faintly. You cannot. These fragments prove nothing. Poirot bowed. Not proof, no, but direction. Fear guided your hand to the blotter. Yet fear alone is not guilt. Someone else transformed fear into action. He moved to the decanter. Under magnification, he pointed out a faint film along the lip, distinct from sugar. Residue of powder. Digitalis. Ground fine. It was not dissolved directly in the brandy. It was dusted upon the cube, which was then dipped and stirred. This required preparation beforehand. He looked to the Colonel. Your tin of sugar cubes. May we examine it again? Reluctantly, the Colonel produced it. Poirot tipped the contents onto a napkin. All were white, save one with a faint yellowish tint. Poirot lifted it delicately with tweezers. Voila! A cube infused. A soldier's habit of carrying sugar became the murderer's opportunity. But who took advantage? Kershaw's eyes gleamed. It must be the Colonel himself. Poirot raised a finger. No. Consider. The Colonel is bluff, impatient, careless with detail. But this crime, subtle, psychological, timed within minutes, requires delicacy. The Colonel might carry cubes, yes, but would he think to infuse them? I doubt it. He turned slowly toward Radovich. Count, you are elegant, meticulous, precise. You bow twice, you stage appearances. Such a man notices the smallest things. Such a man would recognize the chance to use what another carried. Radovich's composure faltered for the first time, a shadow crossing his face. You accuse me because I am foreign, because I carry myself differently. Poirot smiled gently. I accuse you because the pieces fit. You lingered on the terrace, visible yet unobserved, near enough to the French windows to slip inside unseen. You dismissed what others heard, you explained away what others saw. And you, who deal in art and commerce, knew too well that the letter from Vienna would unmask deceit, perhaps a deceit in which you were partner. Miss Vale leaned forward. Breath quickened. Then it was Radovich? He gave Sir Reginald the brandy. Poirot shook his head. Not so fast, mademoiselle. The truth is delicate. Count Radovich had knowledge, yes, and opportunity, yes. But we must ask, who placed the glass into Sir Reginald's hand? Who spoke the words, drink it, calm yourself? Miss Vale overheard, but not clearly enough. Was it Radovich or another? The Count's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. You play with us, monsieur. If you know, then say it outright. Poirot remained serene. In due course. A puzzle must be solved piece by piece. Already the pattern shows itself, but the final detail waits to be revealed. Kershaw scowled. And how long do you intend to drag this out? Poirot smiled faintly, until the guilty hand, pressed by its own impatience, betrays itself. That moment is close, mon ami. Very close. The company shifted uneasily, each measuring the other, while Poirot smoothed the rug corner with delicate fingers, as though restoring order to a world briefly disarranged. He stood, brushing his hands together. This evening, mes amis, I shall assemble you all once more. By then the path will be complete, and the murderer shall have no refuge in silence or denial. His eyes rested briefly on Radovich, then upon Mrs. Linton before turning to the door. Until then, let us walk carefully. A single step may betray everything. The household drifted through the long afternoon in a haze of suspicion, each guest finding excuses to remain in sight of others, as though solitude itself might be construed as guilt. Poirot, however, withdrew quietly into the library once more, seating himself at the great mahogany desk with the blotter before him. He stared at the faint impressions with an almost reverent patience, as though listening to the ghost of a pen. Inspector Kershaw, restless, entered after some minutes. "You've seen everything a dozen times. Why not simply charge Radovic? The sugar cube proves it." Poirot shook his head gently. "Non, mon ami. The cube is evidence of means, not identity. The true criminal hid behind another's habit. To accuse too soon would be to let the fox escape while we cage the dog." Kershaw frowned. "Then who?" Poirot tapped the blotter softly. "This, my friend, tells us more. The pressure of the pen, too delicate for the kernel, too hurried for ash. Radovic writes with tight control, yet this tracing wavers as though the hand trembled. It is a scholar's hand, yet not confident. It belongs to one who feared discovery more than all others." Kershaw's eyes narrowed. "Linton again?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, but not in the way we thought. Madame sought certainty, yes, but she did not act alone. Someone else took her fear and turned it to their advantage." As evening descended, Poirot summoned the company once more to the drawing-room. The lamps glowed, casting long shadows, the atmosphere charged with expectancy. Lady Whitcomb sat stiff and pale. Ash fidgeted with his cuffs. The colonel glared as though defiance itself were armor. Miss Vale leaned forward with bright intensity. Mrs. Linton clutched her gloves like a talisman, and Radovic appeared elegant yet taut, as if a mask were stretched too finely across his face. Poirot rose, his small frame commanding nonetheless. "Mes amis, we have walked together through shadows. Now the path clears. Sir Reginald died between 3:30 and 4:15. Poison was placed in his brandy, bitterness disguised by sugar. The cube came from the colonel's tin, but the colonel did not infuse it. Another hand prepared it. Who would think of such a subtle act? A man of appearances, of ceremony, who bows twice because once is not sufficient. Count Radovic." The count's face hardened, but Poirot raised a hand before protest could begin. "Yet motive, mes amis, is the greater chain. Radovic profited from deception, yes. But fear, the most desperate fear, was not his. It belonged to another. The blotter reveals it. A hand traced words, sought to know in advance what the Vienna letter would say. That hand was Madame Linton's. She feared her judgment would be exposed, her reputation destroyed. She sought reassurance and, failing to find it, gave opportunity to one more ruthless. Mrs. Linton gasped, her voice breaking. "I traced the words, yes, I feared humiliation, but I swear I never poisoned him." Poirot's gaze softened. "I believe you, madame. Your fear prepared the stage, but another delivered the final act. Who then urged Sir Reginald to drink? Who spoke the words, 'Calm yourself'? Who sat opposite him, moving the chair, pressing the glass into his hand? It was you, Count Radovic. You took the cube, dipped it, and offered it with charm. You ensured Lady Whitcomb's maid would arrive too late. You trusted that suspicion would fall upon others, the colonel with his cubes, Madame Linton with her fears. But the pattern betrays you." Radovic's smile froze, then faltered. For a moment he remained motionless, the room holding its breath. Then he laughed, low and sharp. "You are clever, monsieur, but words alone. What proof have you?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "The proof lies in your own elegance, monsieur. You bow twice, once to greet, once to conceal. When you lifted the decanter yesterday evening for the inspector's inspection, you replaced it precisely, but not precisely enough. I saw the trace of powder where you touched, and the chair, slightly skewed." Your haste betrayed you. Finally, Miss Vale's testimony, a man's voice urging Sir Reginald to drink. She could not swear to the tone, but the accent, faint though it was, carried a lilt not of England, but of your Balkans. That is the final thread, Count. Together they weave a net. Radovic rose suddenly, his composure shattering. Lies! All lies! But his eyes darted toward the door, and in that flicker the company knew. Kershaw stepped forward, blocking his path, while the constables entered at a nod. Radovic's shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked weary rather than elegant. He would have ruined me, he muttered. He mocked me as he mocked all. I gave him courtesy, and he sneered. Better he die than I be shamed. Poirot bowed his head slightly. And thus, monsieur, you prove once more that pride is the deadliest poison of all. Lady Whitcomb sobbed quietly into her handkerchief. Ash whispered a prayer of relief. The colonel muttered an oath, and Mrs. Linton closed her eyes as if absolved by exposure. Poirot alone remained still, immaculate as ever. Justice, he said softly, does not restore the dead, but it restores order, and order, mes amis, is the foundation upon which even sorrow may stand. The constables led Radovic away, and silence settled, heavy yet clean. Poirot straightened his cuffs, smoothed his moustache, and looked toward the window where night pressed against the glass. Come, Hastings is not here to record my little triumph, he murmured, so I must record it myself, in the order of memory, not vanity. And with that, he took his hat, bowed once, and departed into the quiet of the evening, leaving behind a house scarred by betrayal, yet steadied by truth. The echoes of Radovic's footsteps faded down the corridor, swallowed by the heavy tread of constables. In the drawing-room, the remaining guests sat subdued, as though the air itself had been cleared by storm. Lady Whitcomb, still pale but steadier now, lifted her head to speak. Monsieur Poirot, I scarcely know whether to thank you or to grieve anew. My husband's honor lies in ruins, yet the truth is at least no longer veiled. Poirot inclined his head gently. Madame, honor is not a thing preserved by denial. It is preserved by courage in the face of truth. Sir Reginald erred in his scholarship, yes, but the greater shame belongs not to him, but to the man who feared exposure and chose murder. Mrs. Linton, her composure bruised, whispered, I let my fear rule me. My reputation seemed everything, but I swear I never wished his death. Poirot looked at her kindly. And that, madame, is why you live to reflect upon your error. Fear misled you, but fear is not guilt. May it serve as lesson, not condemnation. The colonel grunted, pouring himself a stiff measure of whiskey. Dash it all, Poirot, you've shown us once again that psychology weighs more than pistols or proofs. I should have known. When a man bows twice, it is never just courtesy. A faint smile tugged Poirot's lips. You perceive, mon colonel, that appearances deceive more often than they reveal. That is why I, Hercule Poirot, trust not to chance nor brute strength, but to the order of the mind. Ash, trembling still, came forward. You have saved me from suspicion. I owe you my gratitude. Poirot raised a hand. Pay it by living more honestly, monsieur. Debts are not merely of money, but of character. See that you balance both. Ash lowered his head, chastened. Miss Vale, her eyes bright, asked softly, Did you know from the beginning it was Radovic? Poirot's moustaches twitched with amusement. From the beginning, I knew only that something was out of order. A blotter reversed, a decanter shifted, a bow performed twice. Small things, but each a discordant note. One by one they sang their harmony, until the melody resolved. It is always so. Inspector Kershaw, though grudging, extended his hand. You've the patience I lack, Poirot. I'll grant you that. Without you, we'd have bungled it. Poirot accepted the handshake with a small bow. It is not bungling to seek order, mon ami, but to rush without thought. That is the danger. Yet you, too, did your duty with honor. Together, we have restored balance." Lady Whitcomb rose, steadier now, and extended her hand. "Monsieur Poirot, whatever else may be said, you have spared us the greater torment of ignorance. For that, you have my thanks." Poirot bowed deeply, once. "Madame, you are gracious. I ask only that you remember this day not as the ruin of Sir Reginald's name, but as the proof that truth, however bitter, is always the better draught than falsehood sweetened with lies." The company slowly dispersed, each to their rooms, leaving Poirot alone for a moment in the quiet hall. He took up his hat and gloves, pausing by the great mirror to adjust his tie and moustaches with meticulous care. His reflection gazed back at him, small, precise, unruffled. He allowed himself the faintest smile. "Once more," he murmured, "the little grey cells have triumphed, order is restored, and for Hercule Poirot, order is all." With that, he stepped into the evening air, where the first stars pricked the velvet sky. The affair of the gentleman who bowed twice was ended. Another crime had been untangled, another truth revealed. And Poirot, immaculate as ever, walked on into the night, leaving behind a house forever marked by the bow that had concealed a murder.